Snow fell like shards of glass across the Norwegian wilderness. The night sky above the mountains was black, heavy, and endless. 6 men trudged through waist-deep snow, their breath crystallizing in the freezing air. Each carried a rifle, explosives, and the quiet knowledge that they were likely marching to their deaths. Their orders were clear: infiltrate a fortress-like factory deep inside Nazi-occupied Norway and destroy it. No rescue, no backup, no way home if it failed. It was, as one British officer put it, a mission no one was supposed to survive. The year was 1943, and the world was on edge. Nazi Germany controlled almost all of Europe, its scientists racing toward the creation of the most terrifying weapon imaginable, the atomic bomb. British intelligence had discovered that the key to that bomb was being made in one unlikely place: a hydroelectric plant built into the side of a mountain in a small Norwegian town called Vemork. Inside that plant, scientists were producing a strange, heavy form of water, deuterium oxide, known as heavy water, essential for nuclear fission. Without it, Germany's atomic dreams would collapse. With it, Hitler could win the war overnight. The Allies had already tried to destroy the plant once. That first mission, Operation Freshman, ended in disaster. The gliders carrying British commandos crashed in the mountains. Those who survived were captured, tortured, and executed by the Gestapo. The plant kept running, and Hitler's supply of heavy water continued to grow. So the British turned to a new idea: a team of Norwegians who knew the land, the snow, and the silence. They would ski across the icy wasteland, infiltrate the plant, and blow it to pieces from the inside. It was suicide, and they all knew it. But for their country, and for the world, they were willing to try. The man chosen to lead the mission was 23-year-old Joachim Ronneberg. Calm, focused, and impossibly young, he had fled Norway when the Germans invaded, trained in Scotland, and returned as a commando. He gathered 5 men: Knut Haukelid, Frederick Kaiser, Kasper Eidland, Birger Stromsheim, and Hans Storhaug, each of them a skier, a climber, and a man who knew how to survive in the unforgiving north. They called the mission Operation Gunnerside, and it would become one of the most dangerous, daring acts of sabotage in human history. On the night of February 16, 1943, a British Halifax bomber flew low over the snowy plateau of Hardangervidda. Below, the world was a desert of ice. No lights, no villages, nothing but wind and snow. One by one, the men leaped from the plane, their parachutes snapping open in the darkness. They landed hard in drifts of snow, gathering their supplies as the bomber vanished into the night. Alone now, they began their march. For days they skied through blizzards, sleeping in the open, their beards frozen solid. They ate reindeer meat and scraped ice from their clothing before putting it back on. When they finally reached the advance team, a group of Norwegians who had been living in hiding for months, they found them almost unrecognizable. They were starving, frostbitten, and weak, but alive. The two groups embraced like brothers. Now, together, they could begin. The Vemork plant sat like a fortress in the valley below, a gray monolith clinging to the edge of a gorge, surrounded by floodlights, fences, and guards. A single bridge crossed the ravine, the only obvious way in, but it was mined and watched day and night. Approaching it would be suicide. So Ronneberg decided they would go the impossible way, down into the gorge, across the frozen river, and up the sheer cliff on the other side. It would take hours. One slip, one misstep, and they would fall to their deaths or be discovered. That night, a storm rolled in. Wind and snow so thick you could barely see a meter ahead. It was perfect. The Germans would be huddled inside. No one would expect anyone to attack in a blizzard. The men moved out. They crawled down the ravine, their hands freezing on the rock, their boots sliding on the ice. At the bottom, they crossed the river, black water surging beneath the ice, and began the climb up the far wall. When they reached the top, their bodies were soaked and shaking. Ahead loomed the plant, tall, silent, humming with power. They found a small railway track that led to a side door. To their disbelief, it was unlocked. Inside, the halls were dark. The commandos crept silently through the corridors, guided only by dim flashlights covered with cloth. They could hear the distant hum of machinery. Then, they saw it, the heart of the German nuclear effort. Rows of pipes and cylinders, gleaming metal tanks filled with heavy water. This was what the war could turn on. Working quickly, the men unpacked their charges. Each explosive was timed to detonate in seconds. Ronneberg checked the fuses twice, then set them. There was no shouting, no panic, only silence. Before leaving, he placed a British Tommy gun on the floor as a calling card, proof that the Allies had done this. Then, the men slipped out the same way they came. Moments later, the ground shook. A dull roar echoed through the mountains. Inside the plant, pipes burst, water gushed, and the machinery collapsed in a flood of steam and sparks. The entire basement was destroyed. The production of heavy water halted. Not a single person was killed. The saboteurs had vanished into the storm. When the Germans discovered what had happened, they were furious. They scoured the mountains, sending dogs, soldiers, and planes. But the Norwegians were ghosts. They split up, disappearing into the wilderness. Some hid with local farmers. Others skied hundreds of kilometers to Sweden. Every one of them survived. Back in London, when the message finally arrived, Operation successful, the room fell silent. The mission that had been doomed from the start had succeeded beyond belief. The heavy water plant was crippled, and Hitler's atomic ambitions shattered. But the story didn't end there. Months later, the Germans repaired the plant and tried to ship the remaining heavy water to Germany. The Norwegian resistance intercepted their plans. On a cold February morning in 1944, a ferry called Hydro set out across Lake Tinnsjø, carrying barrels of heavy water in its cargo hold. As it crossed the lake, an explosion tore through its hull. The ferry sank, taking the barrels, and the last hope of the Nazi nuclear project, to the bottom of the icy water. When the war ended, the truth of these missions began to emerge. Historians called them some of the greatest acts of sabotage in modern history. What those men did changed the world. If they had failed, the war might have ended very differently. Years later, Joachim Ronneberg rarely spoke about it. When he did, he was humble, almost embarrassed by the attention. He said he had simply done what was necessary. When asked if he had been afraid that night, he smiled softly and said, "Of course. But fear means you're alive. And if you're alive, you still have a chance." The men of Operation Gunnerside were not supposed to survive. They were sent on a mission so dangerous that even their commanders expected to lose them. But against the odds, they lived. And in doing so, they stopped one of the darkest nightmares in human history. The heavy water plant was gone. The German bomb project never recovered. And the world was spared a weapon that could have changed everything. Today, the ruins of the Vemork plant still stand, perched over the gorge, now a museum. Visitors walk through the same halls where those men once crept through the dark, their hearts pounding, their hands setting the charges that would alter history. It's quiet there now, just the wind and the echo of footsteps on concrete. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The steady breath of men who refuse to give up, the whisper of skis on snow, and the faint, distant explosion that saved the world. The mission no one was supposed to survive did, and because of it, the world did too.